What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over some running backs to both trade for and away this week. As always, I'm recording this after the Sunday games, before the Monday night game, so anything that happens in that we will go over as part of the Wednesday start-sit video. So let's get things started off as usual with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which running back ranks dead last in both rushing yards over expectation and rushing yards over expectation per attempt. And the answer is Devonta Freeman. And Nile Hechdeva gets another one right. Today's stat. Through Sunday, we saw two running backs in the top 15 not score a touchdown. One was Alvin Kamara, who was the other one. And by top 15, I mean this week. So in week 7, among the top 15 running backs in scoring in this week, two of them did not score a touchdown. One's Alvin Kamara. Who's the other one? All right, first running back over today is Ezekiel Elliott. And Zeke hasn't scored in back-to-back weeks now, although he was not the answer. He was not a top 15 running back this past week. And he has back-to-back weeks as well with only 12 total carries in each week. The Cowboys honestly look like absolute trash. And it's not like the Zeke owner doesn't know that, right? Everyone can see just how terrible they've been on offense, which means the Zeke owners are definitely getting nervous. They know he's still involved, but they see this offense and they're like, oh no, like he was an insanely valuable pick when we had Dak Prescott, but now that the offense is taking a huge hit, he's much less valuable. But we need to remember the matchup. We should all know at this point Washington has one of the best pass rushes in all football. We knew the Cowboys' offensive line had some injuries, and so this was, I believe, a top 3 matchup in terms of offensive line disadvantages on the week. We knew they were going to struggle in this one, so it's not surprising he had a poor game. And since it was a blowout fairly quickly, he also didn't get his full run. But it's worth noting his day does look a lot different if Andy Dalton hits him on his red zone target. He ran a really nice route. The ball was just behind Zeke. And if that ball is maybe a yard or two more to the left, I guess the right for Zeke, the left for Dalton, it's probably a touchdown. And his day looks a lot better if he has that 8-9 point catch, right? Counting the reception, the yards, the touchdown. And so it's just worth noting these little things, like where he's probably not even included in this video if Dalton throws the ball 2 more feet to his left, but he didn't. And so now Zeke only scores, 5 or 6 points depending on the scoring format. He only has the 1 reception. They score 3 points as a team. He has, 12 carries for 45 yards. And so days can look a lot different depending on a little bit of variance. And while it is going to be a problem moving forward, his quarterback play, we still know he's going to get the vast majority of the work, nearly all of the work near the goal line. He's still going to be very valuable, and he's still going to be easily a running back 1. And so if you can get him on a discount after these 2 poor games, and especially after last week, I would do it. Another running back to buy low on is Josh Jacobs. He's coming off an even worse game, 10 carries for 17 yards in a game that the Raiders started off really hot, and they looked like they were potentially going to win this game. They're coming off the bye. They just drive down the field, score the touchdown. We're like, ooh, this looks good. They basically got dominated from that point on. They lost the game by a ton. They could not stop Tom Brady on any possession. And you know what? It's not shocking as well that the Raiders didn't perform that great on offense. Sometimes we just need to look at matchups and be like, you know what? It's not going to work today. The Bucs are an awesome defense. We know they have a fantastic run defense. We know that the Raiders' entire offensive line just missed like the whole week of practice since they had to quarantine because their right tackle had COVID, who was also out for this game. That doesn't help. But the offensive line wasn't practicing. They didn't even know if they were going to be playing in this game. And so that sets up very difficult for Jacobs when he's not practicing with his offensive line. And, he's got his right tackle missing, and he's already going up against probably the single most difficult matchups for running backs. So we need to kind of give him a pass on this one. He's still the running back 14 in points per game, despite this 4.6 point disaster, and he's that high in points per game because he is averaging a little over 22 touches per game. He is still one of the more game script dependent running backs, but he's still running back one, and we say he's game script dependent, but I don't really expect this sort of performance to happen any more times this season. I really think the Raiders are a better team, especially offensively, than most people think. They have dealt with injuries. They have dealt with this offensive line situation. They have had a few difficult matchups. And you know what? I really think moving forward, they're going to be pretty competitive. So while I do say, yes, game script dependent, they lose by 20, Jacobs just isn't going to have a good game, I don't think they're going to get blown out very many, if any, more times. I think they'll be very competitive, and if Jacobs is getting 20 to 25 touches in their competitive games, you want him, especially after a few duds in a row. And I wouldn't say a few duds in a row, I guess. He did have the 2 touchdowns a little bit before the bye, but he's basically had the 2 good games, right? Week 1, he scores 3 touchdowns. Right before their bye, he scores the 2 touchdowns, but every single other week hasn't been that great. I think moving forward, he's going to be more consistent. We know he's going to get work in the receiving game every week. He's going to get his 3, 4, sometimes 5 targets. He's going to get all the goal line work. There's just a lot of opportunity for him so that in games that they don't get blown out, he should be solid moving forward. And so I would be trading for him. Next up, we have a sell high, and it's Todd Gurley. He's got 6 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks, including 4 top 20 finishes and 2 top 3 finishes. So he's been very good over this last month plus. He's done that also despite only 2.6 yards per carry on 43 carries over these last 2 weeks, simply because he's faced 4 below average run defenses in a row, including 3 top 5 matchups in the last 4 weeks. He's had a dream schedule, and that's why he's been producing really well. What happens in week 8? He gets another cupcake matchup. It's crazy how easy his schedule has been, so he should have another really nice game this week. But then, starting in week 9, he faces Denver. Then they go on bye, and then he faces the Saints, Raiders, Saints again, Chargers, Bucks, and then at Arrowhead in the championship. There are 4 matchups in there against elite run defenses. In the championship game, you look at it in terms of like yards per carry allowed, DVOA, it's going to be like a solid matchup, but in Arrowhead is definitely one of those games where the Chiefs just show up. They just play extraordinarily well at home on defense, and so it could be a game that just gets out of hand for the Falcons. They can't catch up, or it could be a game that the Chiefs defense just overwhelms them and they can't get anything going on the ground. So that's a very concerning matchup. Again, the 4 other matchups, we've got Saints twice, we've got the Bucks, we've got the Broncos. You could include the Chargers in that. I mean, these are really difficult matchups, no easy ones moving forward. And so given that he's getting nearly all his value off of touchdowns, well, that's fine if he's going to continue playing against really easy opponents in very high scoring games. But what happens when these totals start to come down? They're playing in lower scoring games and the defenses get much better. Well, now his value takes a hit. So I would try and just capitalize on his good fortune for the schedule and cash out now. Or I guess if you really want to play him for another week, you can cash out next week as well, because I do think he's going to have a really nice game. But it could be time right now to, like I always say, send the offer. See what teams are thinking. If you can't get a deal done this week and he explodes, well, now his owners, or I guess the people who want to be his owners, they're going to be like, oh man, I really should have gotten that deal done for Gurley. Let's do it this week. I think that's a really good strategy to have. Next up, we've got another buy low, and it's Miles Sanders. Now, I personally do think he's going to miss week 8. It was a 1 to 2 week injury when he suffered it last week, I guess 2 weeks ago. But, not this week. He didn't suffer the injury because he missed this past week. It was the week before. So he could return in week 8. I don't think he will, though, just because they go on bye in week 9. So it would make a lot of sense for them to just hold him out in week 8, have week 9 as well to recover, be 100% good to go in week 10. I think that would make the most sense. And the Eagles are generally an intelligent organization, and I think that's what they'll do. Because of that, I think you can only do this trade if you are okay missing him for the next 2 weeks. Like if you can do this trade and be like, you know what, I got solid running backs. Maybe I would prefer, obviously, Miles Sanders to play, but I have a good enough record. I have good enough options that I'm okay with him on the bench right now because I know I'm getting him at a value. You know right now you trade for Miles Sanders, it's at a value. Right? We are not at the peak of his value right now. And so you are getting him at a discount. It's can you survive these 2 weeks, one with him on the IR, one with him on your bench, because you can't put him on the IR when he's on bye. If you cannot afford to take another loss, skip this and go to the next player. But if you can't afford to take a loss, or I mean, it's obviously not just taking a loss because you don't get to play Miles Sanders. You can still win the game. But if you just cannot lose another week, don't do this. Don't do this to yourself where you're trading for the future, but you need to win right now. Target a team that needs to win right now and say, hey, you got to win these next 2 weeks. You don't have Miles Sanders. I have, a solid running back and a pretty good wide receiver that you can use. That's a trade I think you should make for Sanders because he is a running back one. He just hasn't really returned that value yet, only because of the injuries. When he's actually playing, he's been a running back one. And you know what? If you look at his schedule, there is a lot to like. Not that every week he's playing like the Packers, the Lions, the Jets. Like it's not that every matchup is incredibly easy, but he closes the season in 5 games that will likely have 50 plus point totals. He gets the Seahawks, the Packers, the Saints, Cardinals, and Cowboys to close the season. I mean, Cowboys in the championship, that's awesome. But even those other 4 games, these games should be very high scoring. And even if they're a little bit more difficult on the ground, some of them, the Packers obviously are a fantastic matchup, but the Seahawks a little bit more difficult on the ground. We know the Saints are tough on the ground. The Cardinals aren't just like a team we're wanting to attack on the ground. And so those games, even if it's not super easy for him, they're going to be so high scoring. The touchdowns will be there. They will need to throw the ball at times. He is great in the receiving game. They're not going to be blowing these teams out, obviously. Like Philly doesn't blow teams out. They kind of stink. And so they're going to need to lean on Miles Sanders. And I really think if he's 100% coming into week 10, you trade for him now, you win that trade. I really don't think you're going to give up too much to where you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have offered, these 2 lesser players for Miles Sanders. I think it works out. So if you can afford to have him on your bench and on IR for these next 2 weeks, do it. Next up, we've got the most valuable player in all of fantasy, and that's Christian McCaffrey. I have seen multiple Christian McCaffrey trades over these last 2 weeks. So yes, it is possible. You can trade for McCaffrey. I want to dispel that before people are like, oh, well, no one's going to give you McCaffrey. Yes, people absolutely will. They haven't had him for a while. And of course, if you took Christian McCaffrey first overall and he's been getting you a 0 every week, I mean, not in your starting lineup, but he hasn't been a player you can use, you're probably struggling. It's very difficult to build a team when you have the first overall pick and you just lose him almost instantly. So this team is probably struggling. They probably need to win now. And so maybe they just got to win now. They're done with McCaffrey and like, you know what? You take him. He's not going to be free. I can just tell you that right now. But remember what we talked about last week? We went over Kelsey and Kittle. And you know what? We can throw those names into this week as well because they had poor performances. It is always a good idea to just try and trade for these elite players because that's how you win. You don't win the championship by having this insanely good bench and being like, you know what? Every week I have options, right? Well, you know what? You're probably not going to pick the right player like 50% of the time, maybe only 40% of the time, but very, very often you've got to be extremely good at this to always pick the correct players because it's a very high variance sport. And so having a bunch of bench players is not necessarily this insanely good thing. It is great that you get to pick from multiple players, you can play the matchups, and a lot of times you will start the right guy. But having a great bench does not win you the championship. Having a great starting lineup does. And so if you have built teams like we thought we should in the offseason, you've built a ton of depth, and then you've been really active in free agency, and you've built this team that's got a ton of really, really great options for the starting lineup and the bench, you can still win. But you can put yourself in a much better position to win by trading for guys like Kittle and Kelsey and McCaffrey or upgrading your quarterback because those are the difference makers. When you can get McCaffrey's 30 points at running back, that's so much better than having 4 really good running backs, but 2 of them on your bench. And if they score 15 points on your bench, that doesn't help you. Okay? So I would personally really try and trade for McCaffrey. He's one of those rare players who's got like a 15-point floor. That's not an exaggeration. That is his realistic floor most weeks, and his 4 touchdowns through 1.5 games so far should show you his touchdown upside this season in this improved Panthers offense. So I just want to let you know, you probably look at the teams that have McCaffrey and you're like, they're never going to give him to me. Just try and do it, because I know everyone watching this video at least somewhat follows our content, and you guys probably made pretty strong waiver moves throughout the season. You can afford to give up a few players for McCaffrey, because remember the other point I brought up last week. You're not just trading for one. If you trade 3 players for McCaffrey, you're getting McCaffrey and the 2 bench spots that you opened up. So you also have 2 free agent ads. And there are plenty of you guys out there that are asking these waiver decisions, and it's like, why are those players on the waiver wire? And so if you are in a league like that with this awesome options on the free agency, take them. Absolutely do trades that are packaging multiple players for one, because you have great players on free agency as well. So you got to think about it like that. You've got to just try and trade for guys like Kelsey, Kittle, and McCaffrey, because that's just how you win. You've got to get that stud starting lineup. I also want to briefly mention Jonathan Taylor. I included him in last week's video and then they went on by, so obviously my take is the exact same. I think he's going to have a really nice game coming off the bye. He gets a great matchup with the Lions. I just think that his snaps have been going up a lot. He's extremely talented. He just hasn't really gotten that one blow-up game that we've been looking for with Jonathan Taylor. But if that happens against the Lions, I don't think you're getting him for the rest of the season. So if you want maybe a little bit lower-end player, I mean, we talked about trading for like Zeke and Christian McCaffrey because they have their value a little bit lower right now. If you want a little bit of a lesser player, something that you don't have to give up as much to get, I think Jonathan Taylor is your guy. So those are my thoughts on some running backs you should be trading for. I post more running backs to trade for, as well as other positions on the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So make sure to check that out if you want some more options. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? But thanks for watching.